Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. This is a podcast detailing over 12 years of ethnographic research into online autistic communities and sub-communities, covering around 26,000 online data points, over 600 interviews, and several thousand survey responses. On this podcast, we typically talk about autism and Christianity and the intersection of these two things. And sometimes we just talk about autism. And this is going to be one of those just talk about autism ones, because shortly after we recorded our last episode, my guest Eurydice wrote a wonderful piece about friend of the pod, Simon Baron Cohen. And I thought it was really funny. And I thought, okay, I wrote one about our autistic women, and she wrote one asking, okay, what does this mean about men, though? And I thought this was really funny. And so on this episode of John Uses His Podcast as a poorly concealed method of talking to people whose writing he likes, we have Eurydice back on the pod.
Woo! Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to write your wonderful Substack piece?
What specifically did? It's something that has percolated for a long time in observing discussions about both autism and gender essentialism. In that, when I first heard about Simon Baron Cohen's theory, it was at least immediately connectable to my own observations about how men tend to be. And having less official experience with autism, it was immediately interesting to me because it mapped onto things I had observed in men. And I'm aware that Simon Baron Cohen's theory is not some widely accepted, uncontroversial idea,
But
whether
one day
inside or outside of autistic communities. But I think that's really interesting, as with a lot of kind of gendered topics, because there's clearly a there. That doesn't mean everything's right about it, but it's interesting to me to examine this idea, especially because people usually do examine it from the idea of, let's talk about autistic people specifically and traits that they may share, which include things like systematizing or different emotional or social behaviors and affects. And if you're talking about Simon Baron Cohen, though, his work absolutely implies something about even neurotypical men that I just don't see people really discussing outside of really basic, men are thing oriented stuff. And I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah. So perhaps before we launch into this discussion, we should define what Simon Baron Cohen's extreme of the male brain theory is. So I'll give my best crack at it. Simon Baron Cohen is a serious autism researcher based out of Cambridge. He is known for many things within autism research, and he's kind of one of those names that's ubiquitous throughout the entire field and body of research. And it's very hard to think about autism or do research about autism without encountering him. And he came up with this idea of the extreme male brain. Now, it's called the extreme male brain for a very specific reason. And it's not just because boys were more likely to be diagnosed with autism, although that did factor into it. The theory uses the idea that there are general differences between male and female brains, where male brains tend to be more systematizers and less empathetic than female brains. And Simon Baron Cohen, his idea was that autistic people are sort of hyper-systematizers. And so hyper-systematizers and lacking a more intuitive social communication, emotional or intuitive empathy. And so if you take those traits, so men being more systematizers than empathizers, and women being more empathizers than systematizers, and you have autistic people who are sort of several standard deviations away from the norm in terms of sympathizing and empathizing in the other direction, then like it sort of follows that, oh, this is the extreme of the male brain. There are a bunch of different ways that this is expressed. One of them is, are you familiar with the left brain, right brain pop psychology thing?
I haven't heard about it in a while, but I am roughly familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like the left brain is a logical, smart math guy, and the right brain is the creative, literature and expressive side. And so sometimes people, once they realize, ooh, this has some sort of gender-based implications that we didn't love, they, they were like, what if it's the extreme of the left brain over the right brain or something like that? And then that they're like, well, the left and right brain thing isn't actually real. Like it's far more of a pop psychology high level explanation for really complex neuroscience and neurology. And so often it's just called hyper systematizing model of autism. And when I first heard of that, my first thought was, yep, that checks out. Because my entire experience of autism was basically that. Me and every autistic person that I knew was a hyper systematizer and had low empathy and low sort of social communication ability. And the ability to bond, the ability to do all these things was just significantly lower than it was in the general population of other people that I knew, but systematizing was extremely high. And I read a lot of Baron Cohen's analysis, and he has all these interesting papers where he talks about like taking boys right out of the mother's womb, essentially, and showing them different mechanisms and people's faces and seeing how long this newborn child will look at the gear mechanism versus looking at the person's face, and timing it just to see how long the babies hold attention on one or the other. And he found in one of these studies that male babies spent more time focusing on like a gear mechanism than their female counterparts spent focusing on faces. So boys looked at faces less and gears more, and girls looked at gears less and faces more. And if you looked at autistic babies, or babies who would go on to be autistic, then you would get significantly higher rates of attention. And then these patterns sort of hold throughout early childhood development. And so he's like, haha, extreme of the male brain. We got it.
I proved it.
Yeah, I was actually involved in a study about this. They hooked me up. They put things on my head, and they got me to look at mechanisms that were opening and closing, and faces that were like going from like scrunched up to open and expressive, and just to see what my brain was doing at those different points. And then I had to press buttons and stuff. It was all very exciting. I have no idea. I have no idea what happened to that study. I have looked for it and I haven't been able to find it. But yeah, I asked after like what my results were and things like that, and they were also doing eye tracking. Oh. They didn't tell me they were doing eye tracking, but they were doing eye tracking. They didn't tell me until after it was done, because they didn't want you to know. And I had very good eye tracking on the gears, very good eye tracking on like the opening and closing apertures, very poor eye tracking on the faces, and not looking at the places in the face that the other people look. And so anyway, that's my study story. But yeah, so this is basically what his theory comes down to. And it feels like it's one of those things that if you meet a lot of sort of stereotypical classic Asperger's people, especially like boys who are diagnosed with Asperger's, you kind of look at that and you go, yeah, I can see it. I get it.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Checks
yeah.
out.
And then if you look at girls who are also diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, you go, yeah, I can kind of see this. Because one of the critiques of this theory, which is, by the way, a very fair critique of the theory, is that this is they basically mostly looked at boys because that was who was diagnosed with autism, and that's super
At the
true.
time.
They did like over index on boys when compared to girls. However, there is a subset of the female population that I jokingly refer to as having female boy autism, where they're a girl but they have autism like a boy. And we talk about gender differences in autism. They're often wildly overplayed in like listicle formats or in did you know TikToks, and it makes me want to explode when I see those and hear those, because they're mostly not true. So this is I'm going to publish a study on this probably in the summer. I've been systematizing and collecting data on social media posts about gender and autism from TikTok, from YouTube, from Twitter, and then just comparing it against known literature and seeing how many times they say something that is incorrect versus correct. So I'm doing this with the aid of my Claude Pro 20 Max license. And
Amazing.
I will be posting the results at some point. But at the current moment, we're sitting at around a 67% rate of misinformation, of people saying things about girl autism and boy autism that does not normatively track onto the different categories. And so basically whenever anyone talks about gender and autism, they are almost always pulling up very weird caricatures of either autism or gender. And I don't think Simon Baron Cohen is much of an exception to this, to be honest. Like, a lot of his ideas are a little bit weirdly caricatured when it comes to males and females, because while there are general differences, it's like, is it really more male to be doing this? Is this the extreme of the male brain, or is this perhaps pointing to something else? And anyway, so that is the idea of the extreme of the male brain theory of autism. But you wrote about your thoughts on this. Do you mind explicating more on your ideas?
With the caveat that I doubt I would be an exception to that 67% of gender and autism
Oh
writing that is
yeah.
not necessarily supported by peer-reviewed data. I will say that my experience has generally been that it is true on average that men are a little bit more interested in things like mechanisms or things that don't involve people per se, or emotions, feelings, social networks, for example, per se, than women are. And the reverse is also true. And I think it's interesting to compare that, as I say, to Simon Baron Cohen's observations. And honestly, I am interested in the fact that Simon Baron Cohen is controversial, because I can see that there is at least some overlap in people who have, say, broader autism phenotype in my life. And especially when people speak casually, they reify this. People will talk about being male brained in their autism or in their ASD1 or their broader autism phenotype. And it's like there's a little something to it. And I often find myself curious about patterns like that without wanting to reify this idea that the sexes are these two alien species who are like forced to cooperate. It's interesting to me to try to piece out what might be true, even though these stark differences aren't really easily provable. They don't reflect life as it is.
In terms of putting forward unprovable autism theories, you're in good company. Like the thing
Clearly.
that the thing that always gets me is people get really upset at Simon Baron Cohen and his extreme male brain theory. And they go, this doesn't have the evidence backing that other theories do, or like this doesn't have good evidence backing. You know, there are all sorts of methodological flaws with his reasoning and all these like completely relevant and very salient critiques of his ideas. And then they'll go on to say like, oh yeah, did you know that monotropism is the best method by which we should understand autism? Or haven't you heard of the double empathy problem? And it's like, in terms of empirical evidence base, those are actually worse than Simon Baron Cohen. So let's take a step back, and if you're allowed to have your dumb theories about autism, let the man cook for a bit, because I personally find it very funny. I frequently reference Simon Baron Cohen and call him a friend of the pod because I have this weird ironic attachment to him. Maybe it's not ironic anymore. Maybe it's just like I genuinely like some of what he has to say because I get so frustrated with the autism popularizers these days that it's like, well, if I have to choose between like the neurospicy quirk chungus or the weird guy from Cambridge being like, you know, these odd fellows are a bit like men, then I'm gonna go with the weird guy from Cambridge. And this has nothing to do with whether or not they're accurate. This is completely to do with my subjective preference for what sorts of BS I'm willing to put up with. And I think in the same way that something like the double empathy problem has explanatory power, and in the same way that something like monotropism has explanatory power, I think the extreme of the male brain theory actually does have explanatory power for a subset of autistic people. And I know this because I cluster autistic people. So I have a whole clustering system, and my clustering system goes from A to P. And in this clustering system, the first 6 clusters are the extreme of the male brain.
I like that they get 6. Well represented.
Yes. There are 6 different variants that I consistently find in my research. So the first 6 clusters are the various subtypes that you would have called back in the day like classic Asperger's syndrome. So when you think of someone who would have been diagnosed with Asperger's in the 2000s, they fall into one of the first 6 clusters. And so I'm a proud cluster C, but I started out cluster A. And you know, these are all very, like, they have weird predictive power. For example, if you look at an autistic woman who is in one of these 6 clusters, you will find her interests will not be stereotypically feminine. You will find, or if they are stereotypically feminine, they'll be a stereotypically high systematizing feminine.
Yeah.
Like, so this is where you get the girls who are really into rocks or really into airplanes, or just like the most autistic computer engineer you can think of, who is also a woman, is in one of those clusters. And if you think of the extreme male brain, and then you think of male stereotypes, these women fit into them pretty well. Right? It's like, oh, so you are messy, you are unorganized, you are hyper fixated on really specific problems, you don't get along well with other people, you have trouble socializing, you're not very pleasant to be around, and you know, you are far more interested in things and systems and talking about stuff than you are people, and you get annoyed with other people who want to talk about people. And like, women who fall into one of these first 6 clusters have an enormously difficult time bonding with other women, even if they're like into American Girl dolls or something like that. They're into them with such a level of intensity, specificity, that puts all the other women off around them who aren't also autistic, right? And I like in turn, if we're going to be allowed to have the double empathy problem or monotropism or like masking or whatever, we also need to acknowledge that in our sort of vibes-based analysis of autism, Simon Baron Cohen might have a few points.
Maybe.
But, keep in mind, the remaining 10 clusters do not map to the extreme male brain of autism at all, right? You get very weird things that come up in those later clusters. But the thing about those later clusters is they also tend to be co-occurring with other conditions. So they tend to be co-occurring with OCD or with high anxiety or with other things like that could play a role, or they co-occur with very different being raised in a very unconventional way, or military kids, for example, move around all the time, and that moving around tends to shift them out of the first 6 clusters and into the farther ones. I don't know why. It's just far more rare if you are constantly moving throughout your childhood to be in one of those extreme of the male brain clusters. However, it is very odd to me that if you don't have any serious overshadowing co-occurring condition, you slot pretty well into one of those first 6 clusters. And so I have co-occurring ADHD, but my co-occurring ADHD is very mild. However, once that ADHD becomes more severe, you stop getting people in one of those first 6, and you start getting them on the outliers. And so I started to realize at one point, maybe there is actually something to this. However, there are just co-occurring factors that push people in other directions. And yeah, like autistic people pretty much across the board are hyper systematizers. No matter what cluster they're in, it's just, do they hyper systematize in the same way? And it's typically, if you are you have a fairly normal childhood, fairly stable, your parents like each other, you aren't like heavily bullied, and you have lots of other things. If things pretty much go normal for you and you don't have co-occurring things, you end up in this like in Simon Baron Cohen sights. And I don't know why. I haven't figured out why, but I have this weird affection for him because I'm like, okay, I don't actually think this is true. It is weird how useful it sometimes is for interacting.
Yes.
Because another part of it is I have very intentional socialization algorithms. And ones where I have like, okay, if they are a man and they're like this, I need to act like that, and everything like that. And women who fall into one of those first 6 clusters do not respond well to female socialization algorithms that I use. But they respond very well to the male socialization algorithms that I use. And
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and so it's like, oh, this person, they're probably a cluster A or a cluster D. So my socializing with them will be far more successful. My interview style will be far more successful if I treat them more like I would treat the typical man, regardless of what their gender is. And, again, once you start going past those, you start to get into this very weird territory of, okay, this no longer works, but I have to like treat you very similarly to how I would treat another person of your gender or ethnic background or whatever. But yeah, that is
fascinating. Can you go into specifics of what tends to work and what tends to not work? Or is that, I don't know if that's
so
classified info, but.
No, bluntness is the big one. So cluster A, like the A, B, C, D, E, F are all just like, you need to be blunt, you need to be straightforward, just say what's on your mind. You can push them and they won't be bothered by it. So there are a lot of autistic people who, if you push them and say like, okay, clarify that last statement. They take that as an accusation and they go
Mm-hmm.
into like a defensive panic. But
Mm-hmm.
A through F, you just say it. Can you clarify state, when you said this, did you mean this or this? Okay, good. And you can talk to them like they're clinical test subjects and they won't mind. Whereas you start going like G, H, and beyond, and you start treating them like that, or you start talking to them like that, and they like their defenses start to go up. And I didn't realize that this was a thing before I started doing this research. And then I started doing this research, and I just have a very blunt and straightforward interview style where I just, I get across what I need to get across, and then we just go on to the next one. Okay, cool, good, let's move on. And that really doesn't work well for a large group of autistic people who are very high rejection sensitivity or very high emotional tolerances, and or very low emotional tolerances that
Yeah.
can easily be triggered. And again, this is also when I was in the army. This is how I treated men in the army, or pretty much everyone actually in the army, because it's pretty much all guys, or if it was women, they were used to being in a male-dominated environment.
Yeah.
But very different from how you treat people in your church group. Like when you go from the army to a college and career group with your local church, you cannot interact with the women there like you are interacting with the guys in the army, unless they have autism. In which case, like especially autism in the A through F clusters, in that case, you actually need to treat them like they're a man. And if you treat them like they're a man, lots of things like ribbing and just like saying mean, insincere things to them, knowing that it is a form of bonding, right? Where you both take turns saying mean things back and forth to each other as a sort of performative social ritual to show how close you are to each other, but because you would not be able to say that to someone you weren't close to.
Right.
And so you do this with them. You can't do that with women if you are a man. In most cases, like they do not, they're saying, I'm sad because I tried this thing and it didn't work out for me. You aren't supposed to say, wow, that sucks, have you tried not sucking at things as much? I think that would improve your life if you did that next time. If you weren't just naturally bad at everything you do, I think you would have a better time. Have you considered getting better at this? This is something like men constantly do to each other, right? And this is not something that, anyway, this works fantastically with autistic women of a certain persuasion as well, and does not work at all with the ones who fall outside of it. It's like it really, really works, or it backfires like 10 times as hard as it would with a different type of autistic. So yeah, I trained a Laura you basically send it questions and answers to get it to learn better what it's actually looking at, and you basically just send it a huge list, and then it trains to learn better what its task is supposed to be, and then you can use that to offload processing instead of having to constantly update it. Anyway, I built one of these, and I got it to look at only my side of the interview transcripts, and then figure out, based on how I'm talking, if I'm talking to a woman, and generally what cluster they fall into. And it was surprisingly accurate at figuring this out across like 400 interviews I put into it. It was
Wow.
Surprisingly accurate at figuring out which one I was talking to, based solely on looking at the way I asked questions and how I was asking questions. And
Gosh.
yeah, it could not accurately predict sex, but it could predict which cluster they typically fell into, or which cluster range they fall into, right? Because the clusters aren't really discrete boxes, they're more like distributions.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a thing, and it's very weird. And so this was the genesis of my joke about female boy autism, and male girl autism. This originally arose because you always hear about, well, girl autism, and girl autism is different, and it's like, it's not actually. Like, yes, there are general differences between girls and boys with autism. There are differences. However, a lot of people seem to think that the overlaps are not very large, when in fact the overlaps are very large. And the overlaps between them are very, very large. And a lot of what people call girl autism on the internet isn't really girl autism. It's probably a broad autism phenotype or something like that. Because there are girls with autism who no person in the world would look at and go, oh, that person doesn't have autism. Like you go, oh yeah, she's got it. Like she very obviously has it. And the only the big difference is that girls tend to be more muted in their expression, and girls tend to be better at learning how to pick up on things, and they tend to be socialized differently. And so for autistic boys, you are usually heavily bullied throughout all of school, with a few minor exceptions. Maybe you have one or two friends. Wow. It is a very hard and difficult time, whereas there is a effect with girls called the mother hen effect, where highly socially competent girls will bring in autistic girls into their social group and their social orbit and teach them how to be a girl, and teach them how to be a girl explicitly. And this will have effects where your autism characteristics will get more muted because you had direct instruction on what to do and how to do it. If the same thing happened with boys, you would probably get no differences. Like the differences between autistic boys and autistic girls, I think, are mostly down to socialization and not really down to genetic predisposition or things like that. That being said, genetic predisposition will still play a part, right? There is sexual dimorphism, being the curse from God, is still affects autistic people, and it still affects us to cognitive degrees as well. It's just the autism part, the autism part of that equation is not different, or is not meaningfully different between the two groups. The only differences are in the style and presentation, and the fact that it gets more muted, where another factor is a boy's autistic traits are more likely to be just dismissed as, oh, that's boy behavior, we don't need to correct it. Whereas a girl will show autistic traits and will get corrected because if she's not sitting still or whatever, you tell her to sit still. Whereas a boy is not sitting still, you go, that's a boy. That's that's kind of what they do. Or, if a boy is obsessed with Nazi battleships from the Second World War at age 4, you go, yeah, typical boy stuff. Why wouldn't you be obsessed with that? Whereas with a girl, you would go, hey, why don't you do something else? And I've also talked about this quite a bit, where autistic men typically have an easier time with autism, because in the church specifically, because there are male archetypes that are essentially guy with autism, right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
The absent-minded professor, that is just guy with autism. there is no other way to explain that. Or the obsessive nerd who's super into anything, or
church choir, keeping the books. Yes.
Yeah, the guy obsessed with sports and sports stats. It's that's not autism. That's just a type of guy in a lot of contexts, and especially when you're in highly gendered contexts like churches. Autistic men can find that place for them and just slot into it and lean into the archetype, and people don't give them as much of a hard time for their autism traits, because it's oh, this is just this type of guy. But there are lots of girls who also fit those archetypes almost one for one, and everyone goes, what the hell is wrong with this person? Right? So in Bible studies, men are expected to be combative. Men are expected to question each other and to be like, no, you're wrong about this, and or like cite your source or prove it. Autistic girls are also just as likely to be like that, except when a boy does that, it's like, okay, yeah, this is just what a boy does. But when a girl does that, they get socially punished for it in a way that a girl doesn't. And so, so this is why girl and boy autism is different. It's not like they're different species of things. they have the same underlying neurodevelopmental disorder, and it is just getting expressed differently because you get socialized differently. And socialization has a huge effect on autism expression. And so I think like another aspect of this like extreme male brain theory of autism has to do with autism in its uncorrected state looks like the extreme of the male brain, whereas autism in a corrected or compensated state looks very different. And so I think what people are actually picking up on when they're talking about like girl autism or boy autism or whatever isn't actually like a difference in autism. It's just a difference in a sort of superficial presentation layer that if like it's just corrected versus uncorrected autism, right? And the male traits being ones that you would more typically expect in men just are left to flower and bloom, whereas with autistic girls they are cut down and stomped on and tried to excise them out of the person. But anyway, that's my theory.
So it sounds like that covers a lot of what you describe as female boy autism. How then to understand male girl autism as you have shortened it?
Yes. So male girl autism is a version of autism that goes through some very heavy social differences and social development. So it is much more common in, stereotypically effeminate men. So gay men and other men like that, stereotypically effeminate, stereotypically interested in those other things, but also very common in men who work in care work professions. Oh. So if your special interest as a boy is people, what happens, right? So if you as a boy are really into battleships, that is probably not going to have much of an effect on your social cognition or your social awareness. But if your interest is like teen dramas or something like that, this is going to have a noticeable effect on your cognition. And the more you become familiar with things and the more you become socially familiar, the more you will drift to this category where you will not really express autism in the way that a boy typically does in this unconstrained format, but you will start to exhibit traits that look more like girl autism, which is like a heavily constrained, like autism that develops under heavy constraint.
Fascinating.
And so you also, like with this group of boys, you also get problems like much more likely to have migraines than the rest of the male population. And like I don't know why that is. I just know that the men who end up falling in like the G through P clusters have much higher rates of like co-occurring migraines, co-occurring depression, co-occurring other mental health issues. And it's probably due to the constraints. Like it's probably due to self-constraining and constant self-constraining. At least that's what I think. I have no evidence to back this up. I have weird field observations from a very specific population, which, to be fair, is better than Damian Milton and the double empathy problem. So let me have this. But so I have shifted clusters from A to C. So if you would have met me when I was 16, I would have been cluster A. just undoubtedly the most cluster A you can think of. And like cluster A's are pretty annoying. I'm not gonna lie. They're the guys who are like the ones arguing with you on the internet because you said something wrong once 2 years ago, and they're still bringing it up to you. Like, do you remember when you made this mistake? Yeah. So I have shifted clusters as I've aged, and one of the reasons for this shift is just increasing social awareness. Because as you move along, like through A to F, you become more socially aware. So cluster A's tend to be quite young. So most of them that I meet will still be in their teens or late teens. Whereas cluster C's are usually still retain a lot of the characteristics of an A or a B, but are just significantly more socially aware and then socially self-reflective. They still don't perform well at all, right? Like they have the theory, they don't have the execution. And cluster A has no theory and no execution. Cluster B has theory and doesn't care, like actively rejects the theory. Cluster C has theory, cares about it, can't apply it to save their life. And you know, and as you go along that, you get like differences in, have they built enough awareness of people and things around them versus have they actually thought about how they can actually perform this.
Interesting.
And so as you get to like cluster H and beyond, you have really high rates of social anxiety. And you have high rates of social anxiety because you understand that people are perceiving you a different way, and you know that something is going wrong, and you're like super actively aware that something is going wrong.
Oh.
Whereas A through D usually can't tell that something's going wrong in the moment, and it shows. And yeah, so you get this very wide range of things, but like the male girl autism fall into the clusters typically, like they'll be from like D to M or whatever. And yeah, so male girl autism is basically men who, for whatever reason, were either unable to fall into one of those male archetypes and unable to figure out how to develop in more masculine spaces, and so as a result end up learning socializing really well, or picking up on social mannerisms in a different way, and they end up sort of shifting themselves to that place. And so yeah, that's sort of what it is. And I call it male girl autism because it's typically what you find in autistic girls, right? They're also like very rejection sensitive, very conflict averse, very, you know, another thing about like the first 6 clusters is they are not only not conflict averse, they tend to be conflict seeking, right? Like they actively want to fight and debate, and they will go looking for opportunities, and they will like point out your errors when you make them, and things like that, and they will pedantically nitpick you whether you like it or not. They will offer corrections, and they'll be like, 6 months ago you said something slightly different, do you realize this? And as you get past that, you get like significant conflict avoidance. So like cluster H is extremely conflict avoidant, also tends to have co-occurring OCD. But anyway, yeah, that's my classification system.
This is fascinating.
People keep asking me to do an episode, like a dedicated episode explaining each cluster, and I tend not to want to do it because it gives people brainworms, right? So like knowing are you familiar with looping effects, like Ian Hacking's looping effects?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so looping effects are a very interesting phenomenon. One second. I will just make sure I got the right guy. I think it's Ian Hacking. Yeah, so it is Ian Hacking. So Ian Hacking came up with this idea of looping effects, where he's talking about in classifications of psychiatric diagnoses, once they get introduced to a person, that person takes on that label and then starts to reify those symptoms that they are seeing. And it tends to loop. so like a person, this is a phenomenon I've also documented, which is that once a person learns they're autistic, their scores on the RADS-R go up. So their scores on autism, like quizzes and assessments, go up once they learn they're autistic.
Weird.
And the longer they've known they're autistic, the higher their scores tend to be.
No way. I would expect a bump and then a plateau or a drop off.
Like it is a plateau, to be clear. It's just
Okay.
like it's a bump up and then it stays up.
Wow.
So like if they were scoring 110 before, they'll now score 140 and they'll kind of stay in the 140s-ish range. And so another reason why I tend not to like go into detail about this is I'm worried about looping effects, like contaminating my data. Because once a person starts going, oh, you said I'm a cluster H, and this is what cluster H's do, they are more likely to start reifying those categories and behaviors.
Gosh.
And I don't know if that's a good thing to do to people, because like some of the clusters aren't good. Right?
Yeah.
Some of the clusters of autistic people are like, oh, you have a lot of very serious dysfunction problems.
A lot of things are hard for you, and a lot of things are probably painful for you.
Yes, yeah. And maybe you have Cohen BPD or something like that. And is it a super good idea for you to label yourself as a cluster whose only real defining characteristic trait is that you have co-occurring BPD? Probably not.
Probably right? Not.
This is probably not a good thing. And so like with looping effects, you have these like complicated feedback loops where you become more like your autism becomes more reified as you learn about it.
Oh.
And another very common phenomena in my research, which I think is a direct result of looping effects, is that once you learn that you're autistic, if you did not know you were autistic in adulthood, so if you get to like age 28 and you did not know you were autistic before and you now know you're autistic, your quality of life will probably increase by around 30%. Just on a scale of 1 to 10, I ask people to rate themselves. Scale of 1 to 10, where were you before you were autistic or before you knew you were autistic? And where's like your self-perception of where you are now? And there's usually a 30% increase in quality of life from just knowing you're autistic. However, with that caveat, some things get worse once you learn you're autistic. Particularly, you tend to become less socially resilient.
Oh.
So once you learn you're autistic, you are more likely to, your social battery is more likely to quickly drain. That is one of the effects that I found, because you're more aware that you are autistic in a world of other non-autistic people who you are now interacting with. Whereas before you had the diagnosis, you don't have words to describe it. And so you are better at like the social resilience needed to push you through those conversations. Whereas now you know that, oh, I'm actually feeling this way because something's wrong with me, and that thing is called autism. You are less likely to be able to push those feelings down and force them away as like, oh, this is an irrational feeling, this is a rational thought, this is actually good, this is fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. You kind of lose that when you get autism, when you get an autism diagnosis, and when you become aware of your autism diagnosis, because that feedback loop that you had previously been giving yourself disappears. And now you have, oh, I feel bad because I'm autistic. And like that is accurate. that is more accurate, right? You were accurately assessing the situation, but your inaccurate assessment of the situation beforehand was actually making you more socially resilient. And so you will be more prone to feeling overwhelmed, you will be more prone to social anxiety, and you will be more prone to like social battery drainage once you learn you're autistic. However, everything else increases. So overall, the trade-off is around 30% on average. So I recommend people do get diagnosed, but to also understand that there are these sorts of effects and side effects, and that also labeling yourself as something is a very good recipe for not getting better at that thing. Right? So applying deterministic labels to yourself is often a little counterproductive, especially if
Yes.
those negative labels, or if those labels have like negative valences to them.
They're
Um,
stickier. Yeah.
yeah, they tend to be stickier. But yeah,
Yeah.
so that is my field observations of all these types of things. And I think like, I mean, one of the things that I would like you to talk about more is we've been talking all about the autism side of this, but what about the neurotypical side of this? You know, what does it mean for women if we say you have like anti-autism if you're a neurotypical woman, right? Because if you have the extreme of the female brain. I often joke that my wife has anti-autism because she sort of does. All of her friends are autistic. She loves autistic people, especially autistic women. They are her favorite people on earth. And whenever I feel insecure and I'm like, oh no, what if my wife doesn't like me? I have to remind myself all of my wife's friends are just female versions of me. So it's fine. She's not faking it. But it's very interesting because she is not a hyper systematizer. She is probably the farthest thing away from a hyper systematizer. Ever since I started getting really into vibe coding and telling her about vibe coding, she's gotten really into vibe crafting, which to me is a horrifying thought. She does sewing projects and she's like, I'm not going to really measure. I'm just going to let the spirit lead me. Or
That's
like
beautiful.
doing knitting and crochet projects where she's just like, yeah, I'm just sort of figuring it out as I go. I can't conceptualize that. I don't know how you do that, but she is on that side. So what do you think the extreme of the male brain theory means for those of us who are not autistic?
Oh my gosh. The funniest part about you asking that question is that I don't have a clear idea of what my brain has not decided that there is an anti-autism category for women. And it's very interesting to consider that idea. What I have seen is that there are definitely some women who have this intense level of empathy and usually a high degree of selflessness that goes with it. And then, yeah, for neurotypical men, there are inclinations to things that are like, you see behaviors more often that show up in people who are on the spectrum in men who even when they're neurotypical than you do in women, for example. And I don't know what to make of that per se, but I do notice it, and I don't really know what it means or what if anything should be done about it.
What are those like male traits that you think are like classically autistic?
To be horrendously gender essentialist, which is something I have never ashamed enough about being, given my body of work, there's definitely a tendency to be much more interested in things than in people. So, much more interested in, yeah, stuff like airplanes or models, whether it's Warhammer 40K exactly, or a train or model trains. You also see more interest in things like sports and betting, anything that has an interesting sort of mechanistic engagement possible with it is much more gripping to the average dude, including neurotypical dude, than it is to the average woman. And less interest in understanding other people. I'm trying to think of a way to soften that so it sounds a little less rude. But for my part, I do feel like there's a little bit of cultural preciousness around acknowledging some of these things in a way that can feel a little bit frustrating because there are just like, we have all this cultural baggage about talking about how men are better at math and science than women are. And we tried to correct for that, tried to find a different way to talk about that. And that was good. We have kind of an informal willingness to say that men are bad at things that women are good at, but it doesn't resemble the previous, like, oh, men, they do all the things. There is a relatively balanced sense in which men are, on average, this is me being super general essentialist, there are exceptions. I am not being careful when I say this. Men are as bad on average at understanding people and being interested in people as women are at like being interested in how a car works. There's just, and you see corresponding differences in average ability to engage with these systems because there's corresponding differences in interests. And this is very spicy in some circles, which sometimes is confusing to me because when I think about my experiences with people, I'm like, well, there are so many things that are easier to explain if you accept some version of this than there are without it. And as we talked about before I came on this podcast, I was like, I'm not positive exactly how to talk about these observations because they are mildly controversial. But if Simon Baron Cohen can say his thing, I'll just throw my lot in with him and be fine.
Are you familiar with the work of Martin Buber?
No, what a name.
Yeah, it is a hell of a name.
That is a name.
He was a Jewish philosopher and theologian in the mid-20th century. And he is very influential in a lot of 20th century Christian philosophy because he came up with this concept called I and it and I and thou, which are two modes of human relation where I-it is the form of relationality that you are most likely to engage in with a thing or an object. The I-it impulse is the systematizing impulse. So
yes,
you are looking at a tree and, what do you see in the tree? Well, you see it has bark, it has leaves, it has a trunk, it's made of wood. You can think about cellulose structure in it, but you don't have a relationship with a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, maybe you do, but you probably don't. And you don't really have a deep sense of understanding with this tree. You understand this tree as a means to itself. Like it is a collection of objects in space or a collection of points in space with material properties and things about them that you can think about and categorize and sort into boxes. And then there is this other form of relationship that Buber calls I and thou, which is, I always struggle to explain this. I tried to explain this on like 3 podcasts now, but it feels like trying to describe the color of infrared light. I don't, trying to describe red when you're colorblind, right? Like I just fundamentally, I'm really bad at it. But it's like, it's a form of transcendental relational connection where you are not seeing the person as a means to its own end or a system to be understood. You are seeing it as a thing to be encountered or an experience to be shared between two people in a way that is that doesn't demand anything of the other but their presence. And Buber's whole thing was that we go through the world in various stages of I-it and I and thou. So like when you are at the grocery store, the relationship you have to the cashier is I and it. especially nowadays when it's like self-checkout. But assuming it's a person, you are not seeing that person as a whole other embodied being with whom you are sharing a moment in time. Presumably, maybe some people do. I certainly don't. And I think a lot of people get defensive about this because I think men in general spend more time in I-it space
Yeah.
than
That's
I-thou
pretty obvious
space.
from interacting with them, in my
Yes.
opinion.
And I have no idea what I-thou space looks like, if I'm being completely honest with you. This is a concept beyond which my brain was built to understand. My brain was built to crunch numbers, and that's about it. And without the ability to systematically decompose something, I have no ability to interact with it. And like my entire relationship with my wife is premised on the idea that I can do a simulated black box emulation of her internal mental state and like recreate it in an accurate enough way that I can make sense of the things coming out of her mouth. I often describe my relationship with her less as like a relationship between two people, but like my job is to sit at a control panel of a nuclear reactor and monitor the gauges and press the buttons to prevent meltdown and keep power generation at optimal levels and stuff like that. And like, I love my wife. She is the best person in the world to me, and I would
Mm-hmm.
not trade her for any other person. But also, that's the only way I can conceptualize relationality. And I think that this is probably not a great thing in general, right?
I mean,
Like
you
there,
might be giving yourself too little credit for what you can
I
do, but it does sound like you're describing an internal experience of what it's like to be relate to another person.
yeah, but the internal experience is an
Yeah,
internal experience of hyper systematizing.
right.
It's just hyper systematizing something I really care about. And
Yeah.
this brings me to the tweet you shared with me before this podcast, which was a tweet that that simply asks, is it even possible to build a relationship with someone that you don't have common interests?
Mm.
Which is a very autism thing to say. Like it's also a very man thing to say
Yes, it
in
is.
general. And
Yes.
like what I think is going on there is just like you are seeing hyper systematizing in play, where the way that you interact with the world when you systematize, if you get rewarded for that, gets continuously built on. Right. So
Yeah.
this is one problem in autism and religion research that I constantly come up with is in Christianity, you are encouraged to have a personal relationship with Jesus, right? It is like
Mm.
you need to have a personal relationship with Jesus. And 85% of practicing serious autistic Christians say, I have no idea what that means. That
Oh.
this is not a concept that is coherent to me. I do not have it. I've never understood it. I don't get it. And if you say like discipleship or something like that, they'll be like, oh yeah, I can do discipleship. But when you say personal relationship, some like they blue screen, right? Like something just trips a fault in the kernel mode driver and they crash and they reboot. And then you're back to the original point and you say it again and they crash again. And what I think is causing that is really complicated because there are 15% of us who can do that,
Yeah.
who can. 85% of us can't. It just so happens these things generally align with clusters.
Yeah. I
um,
thought they
but
might.
but another really big factor is early emotional life and early childhood development. One very continuous factor is, were you flexing these cognitive muscles from a very young age, or did you go down a reward path that only rewarded systematizing? So
Interesting.
when you came up to problems as a child, did you systematize them away, or were you able to solve them in other ways? And what I think happens is you sort of have like cognitive muscles that atrophy,
Mm.
and you don't exercise them, and you're not like pumping them reg- regularly, and so they just become weak. And then when you try to use them to do heavy lifting in that sort of relational cognitive space, you can't do it very well because those muscles are weak. Whereas someone who trains them from a very young, early age will have stronger cognitive muscles to actually deal with this.
Yeah.
And,
What kind of? No, go ahead.
and I was going to say, I think this also factors into like male female socialization, because
Very
men
plausibly.
often aren't rewarded for those types of behaviors, whereas women are from younger ages. And so you're more likely to like, I think autism definitely biases you toward hyper systematizing. That is very
Right.
obvious. But it's these other modes of thinking. Do you also have access to them? And do you also have access to thinking about relationality in these other ways? And then if you never flex those muscles, you kind of suck at it. Because there are men who are very emotionally intelligent, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think what differentiates them isn't that they're more womanly, it's that they've just practiced a lot
Practiced.
and constantly practiced. And like autism is a disability in that realm. So it like you start off with atrophied muscles in that realm. You can develop them, apparently. Like 15% of us develop them to some extent. But you know, I think that's another explanation perhaps for why these types of differences occur and
Let's
why these go ahead.
I was just going to say it certainly fits with my observations, even that in dating, men tend to develop some of these. They have to start working on these muscles essentially because they find that it's a lot more successful for them to do that. And the world will finally shove them into a position where systematizing is usually not going to work unless they direct it towards outcomes they've never bothered to optimize for before. So, yes,
Wrong again.
practice.
I've been able to make it work everywhere.
Supreme systematizer.
Yes, supreme
Never
systematizer.
defeated.
Yes, my relationship is could be described in a spreadsheet. Not many people can say that, but yeah. So I think that like so that also matches my observations. That the more people just start to do things that require them to do it, the better they become at it, unless they have some sort of disability that prevents them from getting better at it. Right.
Yeah.
So if from a young age socialization biases women to behave in certain ways and biases men to behave in certain ways. And then as you age, you get into more situations in which you start getting incentives to maybe explore the relational side of things a little bit more as a man. And so you develop this, but I think one of the reasons that autistic men are the way they are and why there is an autistic male archetype, right? And why there are types of guy who are just autistic is because they never get into those situations that require them to be that way. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And
Yes.
so like so that's my explanation for what the extreme of the male brain theory means for neurotypicals. I think what it means is that you basically you don't really have a good excuse. Autistic people have a really good excuse for being the way that they are, and that's they have a neurodevelopmental disorder that prevents them from being able to flex and use these muscles. But there are a lot of men who just let them atrophy, not because they have a disability, but because they don't care about using them. And I think that is what causes this sort of extreme of the male brain in men specifically, because you see it a lot more in stereotypically masculine fields, right? So the fields of men where you are less likely to encounter this like high EQ emotional intelligence are male dominated fields, right? Like you can say good and bad things about the army, but one thing you can say is that most men in it are not very emotionally intelligent. And it's mostly because they don't need to develop it. And
No.
and so everyone jokes that like the Marines are crayon eaters and everyone's a little autistic. And it's, well, they obviously aren't a little autistic unless you are thinking about autism as a neurodevelopmental disorder that prevents the normal development of these types of cognitive pathways. And the only difference is they don't have the neurodevelopmental disorder stopping them. They just have socialization factors that have never forced them into that. But yeah, that's my theory. And that girls seem less autistic because they are forced to exercise with these atrophied muscles. And they eventually get stronger because of how long they're forced to interact with it. But the female boy autism still exists, and those are basically girls who have either not been able to exercise those muscles because of the severity of their disability, or girls who have just never had to. And
Right.
anyway, the girls with female boy autism, every single one of them that I like joke, like again, the female boy autism is mostly a tongue-in-cheek thing. Every single one of them, though, falls into the 85% who cannot relationally conceive of a relationship with Jesus. I have yet to meet a single one who falls into that category. Like every single one of them will describe themselves as religious but not spiritual. And yeah, I like, this is my tinfoil hat time. I think that's why. Yeah.
Briefly on the female boy autism, this is calling back to something from quite a while ago, but I was curious. You said that not only do women in autism clusters A through D, or maybe A through G, respond better to more masculine typical conversational patterns, they respond
Yes.
negatively to feminine typical
They do.
conversational patterns,
Yes.
which that surprises me a bit more than that they maybe prefer to operate in a masculine register. And I was curious, again, if you're willing to be specific about some of the feminine typical, or what you would use to talk to a woman, rather conversational registers that they respond negatively to.
So one of them is ambiguity. So never fully stating what your actual feelings on something are, and couching it or intentionally blunting it for their sake. They will detect that you are sugarcoating something for them, and instead of them seeing it as an act of mercy, they see it as like a
Condescension.
slight.
Yeah.
Or yeah, they see it as condescension, and they're like, stop, whatever you're doing, stop doing that.
I don't
I
trust
hate it. Please stop trying to coddle me. And so that's like probably the biggest one, is the treating you like you can't handle the truth, or that you can't handle confrontation or something like that, is something they just like immediately withdraw from. Another one is failing to decouple.
Oh, yeah.
So not associating a person or an idea as bad because it's associated with something bad. They get very upset with that. Cluster A through F are like intuitive decouplers. But like for me, I am consciously aware that decoupling is not always good. And it can often be a very bad cognitive habit to have. Nevertheless, I am a natural decoupler. I just intuitively, I decouple. And so a very common thing with, you know, the H through P's or whatever is you need to performatively denounce. Is, I don't know how else to say it in like a way that doesn't sound condescending. But like if you are about to say something that could be interpreted as controversial, you need to acknowledge that what you're about to say is controversial before you say it's controversial. If you do that with like that category of autistic woman, they will think you are weird, or they'll be like, oh, you are weak. You are not someone worthy of respect who I should have like a normal interaction with. Like you are beneath me, contemptible creature, for thinking that I am not strong enough to be able to decouple myself. And so you see that, and so with a lot of these people, what I will do is I will perform, like, drop controversial statements and not hedge, or not say, or not like denounce them beforehand, so that they can like register me in the tone that I want them to register me.
Productive for
And
research conversations.
yes, yeah, and so, like, I have to do this, right? And so
Right.
for a lot of autistic people, I'll ask them what they think of, do you think abortion is murder? That's how I would ask it to the first group, right? I would say, what are your thoughts on abortion? Is it murdering someone, or is it not murdering someone? When is it killing a person, and when is it fine? Is probably how I would phrase it. If I am talking to other people, I would say the question of abortion is one that is typically quite controversial in Christian circles, and I'm just trying to get you what your opinions are and what your thoughts, however you would like to share them. Very different ways of saying it, right? And so they're like, again, for the female boy autists, I just drop it, and if I were to bring it up like I did the second part, they would probably be like, oh, he's one of those. And I don't want them to be like that, right? I want them
No.
to just drop it how they would normally drop it for me. So another really interesting thing is that, so the gender critical autists, and especially the gender critical autist women, are almost all A through F clusters. Like
Interesting.
they're almost all female boy autists.
Fascinating.
So like, it is wild. Like they will use slurs, and they will 4chan speak. Like they will call people
Yep.
foids and moids, and like, and they will use words that I will not repeat on this podcast for the sake of the cluster H through P's, that are considered slurs for the mentally disabled. But they'll just say that, and they say that as a way of like counter signaling to other women that they're not the type of women you want to interact with unless you are also one of these. And so I recently did a survey. I just emailed a whole bunch of publications, and I had a whole bunch of publications before, of like radfem online magazines or like online blogs that have lots of contributors, and I asked them how many of their contributors had autism and which ones they were, if I could like pull their articles. And like, you read through them, it's like, oh yeah, that's a cluster A, that's a cluster D, that's a C, like lots of C's in there, where like the social anthropologist autist, like the autistic woman who investigates people like they're Jane Goodall watching the apes. That's like a classic cluster C woman who has just like an amazing sense of social theory, but zero ability to execute it. But yeah, so those are like common differences that you see in them, in which like you sort of have to, any signs of in-group signaling to an in-group that is like commonly associated with women, for these groups of women, are ones you need to avoid. and it's not, a lot of them are not N-logs, right? They're not the I'm not like other girls. A lot of them are like straight up feminists. They are just overt, confrontational, and do not like they're feminists, but they're not into femininity, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, so those are some of the key differences. Also, like the distribution of them on Twitter versus Blue Sky. It's like the only A's through F's that are on Twitter are or that are on Blue Sky are men. The autistic women who are cluster A through F are all not on Blue Sky. between the blue sky Twitter split. I once joked to my friend that it was the great cluster split when everyone started migrating to blue sky. It's not quite the same, because there are a few cluster C men who are over there. But yeah, anyway, it's very weird. And another thing is like a really frustrating thing about like the topic of girl autism that gets brought up. Whenever it gets brought up on autism pages, it gets brought up as if it's this mysterious thing that like no one knew how to look for. And to a large extent, no one did know how to look for it in girls. That is sort of true. But it's like, oh, we stop looking for peculiar interests like trains and start looking for like Disney movies instead with the same intensity and focus. It's just like girl interests tend to be less weird and esoteric than boy interests. Or like, you learn that for autistic women, dogs are the trains of autistic women, like having
Really?
a dog special interest. Yeah, dogs and horses, like horse girls.
Right. Yes.
Like, yeah. So there are horse girls, dog girls, rodent girls, snake girls, and bird girls. Those are the 5 category of animal girl autist. These are real. You laugh, but I've seen them.
I do. My wife talks about like the herpetologist girl. There is a lizard girl type. And she just calls them lizard girls, but I suspect some other kinds of crossover there.
Yes. There is very likely crossover. But yeah, like overrepresentation in the furry community from the rodent girls, for some reason. Like ones who are really into rodents, hamsters, bunnies, rats, mice. Overrepresentation with furries. Also, like if you are a horse girl, you are probably in cluster like D through H.
I was about to ask if the specific animals had any clustering.
Yes, they do.
I'm glad to hear that they do.
Yeah, so reptiles are either like A through C,
yep,
or like H through M. The two genders. Do you have do you have female boy autism lizard interest or female girl autism lizard interest? And the way they are interested in lizards is very, very different. The A through C's kill their lizards and pin them to the wall, or they get like display cases for their dead lizards and collect lizard bones and stuff like that, and reptile items basically from reptiles. Whereas the other ones like keeping them alive. So whether you like keeping alive or dead reptiles loosely approximate which cluster you're in.
I don't know what I thought we were going to talk about today, but I don't think I was prepared for alive or dead lizard girl autism. That was a split I was prepared to learn about today.
They're like, again, once you start like collecting mass data, you see very weird patterns emerging. Like, I don't know what to do with this information.
But I have it now.
Like, why is it that if you collect lizard bones and not just like living reptiles, you are more likely to be in a like cluster A through C? I don't know. And maybe it's because A through C's are like stuck in I-it space, whereas H through M aren't stuck in I-it space. They're capable of transcending that to the I-thou plane, and they're able to make connections with the reptiles. Whereas the other ones are just like, well, I don't really care about the living reptile. I care about collecting and sorting reptile things. And like, again, this is, yes, I feel like I'm listening back to what I'm saying as I'm talking. I feel like a crazy person right now.
Sometimes we observe what we observe. And when you talk to as many people as you have talked to, you do tend to pick up some really interesting specific patterns in data once the sample size gets big enough.
Yes, yes. So my prediction when I first started this is that I would not have distinct cluster groups. My prediction was I would basically have a standard distribution. I do not have that. Autism is like a big set of weird bimodal distributions in most cases. And then those bimodal distributions further break down into other clusters, with the split roughly being on like cluster FG, as in terms of like I had the high feelings, low feelings autism joke. That loosely approximates to cluster A through F, and then G through P, with low feelings being in the A through F. For those who don't know, I wrote an article on Substack called "We Need to Split the Spectrum." There's no good reason for me to be sharing a diagnosis with people who have feelings, and to a large extent, this is at least as much basis in reality as other autism theories, the high-low autism split. And it's really funny because whenever I bust out that chart or that joke, inevitably someone will comment, "Ooh, I kind of seem like I'm both." And it's, yes, cluster H, you are both.
Well spotted.
Yes, correct. You do seem like a bit of both. It's because you are.
Here's your chair. I have one just for you.
Yes. Hello, cluster G. Welcome. People have been asking me, like, do a cluster quiz that I can fill out. No, you do not need this in your life. But yeah. So anyway, this has been a wild episode. I had no idea it was going to end this in this place. Do you have anything else you wanted to ask or add?
I do have one last question about, so just kind of since we're talking about clusters, I feel like I've observed a type of guy who is who sounds like he belongs in the A through D category, but who has a disproportionate and strong and surprising emotional reaction to rejection. Is this something like, am I misperceiving this? Is this not a type that you've seen basically? Or is that
no.
a feelings autism type that I'm just misperceiving as A through D?
Oh, so here's the thing. A lot of feelings you can still have really intense emotional reactions to stuff being in A through F. For example, 2 days ago, my wife completely rearranged the entranceway to my house, and I have not recovered emotionally from that change. I say that sort of as a joke. I understand this is not a rational reaction to be having, though. So I'm like, spare it. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's better this way. Your wife's more happy. Just don't say anything. Try not to focus on it. Also, the shoe rack is in the wrong place. So like, it doesn't prevent you from having strong emotional reactions. It's not about having strong emotional reactions. It's about what you emotionally react to. So yes. A through F are extremely sensitive to being told that they are wrong. So being publicly corrected. I'm really bad for this, I will say.
Really?
Yeah. Like
I've never seen it, so I'm surprised.
Fair enough. I just try not to be wrong in public. But when a person calls me out and says, "You're wrong on this," like I get an immediate thing in my chest where I'm like, I must defeat you in combat. Again, not rational. But my wife has called it like my prey sense. When like someone does something and I like turn around like a jaguar about to pounce on someone.
Your eyes go black like a shark's.
Yeah, basically that's what happens. And so like technically that is feelings, right?
Yeah.
But that is feelings about being wrong about technical imprecision, right? Which isn't the thing normal people are upset about, or like feelings about your routine being disrupted, or feelings about your wife rearranging the entrance, but not feelings to like watching a guy get blown up on a video or something like that, or thinking you know those like tearjerker commercials for like Make-A-Wish Foundation or whatever.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like I watch those and I go like, what a ineffective use of money. And that's the thought that crosses my mind. That is not a so it's like high and low feelings are not about not emotionally reacting to things. They're about, do you have emotional reactions to things that people normally have emotional reactions to? And if so, do you have heightened versions of those or diminished versions of those? So, you know, if you listen to a story, a very sad story, do you get personally upset by it in a way that a normal person would be personally upset by it? And if you are personally upset by it, is it like magnitudes more than them? That's high feelings. If a normal person would get upset by it and you are like a stone, unaffected, watching the waves of other people's irrational feelings break over you like the tide, you are low feelings. It isn't that you don't care, it's that you don't care about things that other people think are important or that other people think are emotionally important. And this is again, this is where the Simon Baron Cohen extreme of the male brain hypothesis thing comes in, right? Because again, men are less emotionally reactive to the things that you are expected to be emotionally reactive to, in general, right? And
Right. Yes.
yes, and so autistic people in the A through F clusters, the extreme of the male brain clusters, we can call it for this episode. Please don't come at me, guys on Blue Sky. For those clusters, like you take the typical like socialized male reaction of less emotional reactivity and you just increase that by a few magnitudes.
Yeah.
Whereas you take the opposite end of it of being very reactive and you increase that by magnitudes for the high feelings. Again, another bimodal distribution. And so another sort of thing to be brought up, I think, is that a lot of these are cultural attitudes, right?
Yes.
A lot of these things are culturally conditioned. And so like how did our culture develop like autistic dimorphism? Is a
Amazing
question I
phrase.
wonder. Is a question that I wonder about sometimes, because like these, you know, you read about men in ancient Mesopotamia, for example, and they are expected to be like dancing and singing and crying, and strong emotional expression in a lot of cultures is considered to be a masculine thing, whereas in our
Yes.
culture, like strong emotional expression is considered to be like the subdued stoic is the masculine archetype. And so
Yes.
it's like, okay, how did we get maleness associated with traits more commonly associated with autism is a question I often think and wonder to myself, and I don't have great answers to.
That'd
But
be so interesting.
like in all these things, you start to there are just still many questions left to be answered that are like completely vibes based. Um, but I think they're interesting to consider, at least I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so that is what high feelings and low feelings actually means. A lot of low feelings people still have very strong emotional reactivity. It's just like a normal person doesn't start to see red when they're told like, I disagree with your analysis. They go, oh, a person disagrees with my analysis, and not like, it is now my mission to destroy this person and everything they care about. So that is still a low feelings reaction. It's just it's not that you don't care. It's that you just don't care about things that other people care about.
So that's always been an observation of mine, actually, with respect to decoupling, is that there are limits to the decoupling of naturally high decoupling people. And those do tend to be like, I don't know, it seems clear to me that decoupling is something that comes naturally to anyone who doesn't have very strong feelings about any particular subject. And as soon as you find a subject that they do have strong feelings about, they actually, everybody has something they suck at decoupling on,
Yes.
basically.
Oh, many such cases. Especially with autistic people,
Yeah.
who call themselves low decouplers. You've never seen a guy hold a grudge more than a guy who calls himself a decoupler. Uh, Especially intellectual grudges, like,
Oh, yeah.
4 years ago, this guy was slightly wrong about something, and now they are my sworn enemy. Or like, I had a debate with him and he bested me, but then I learned that the study that he cited failed in replication, and I was unable to say that at the time, and I didn't know it. But now it's my goal to like defeat him again in intellectual combat. It's like, okay, thank you, high decoupling man, for this insight. Very cool, very good. And yeah, yeah, yeah,
Very chill.
yes, very chill, very rational, very well considered. But they will never admit that this is what's actually going on. They will always find a way to intellectually justify it as something completely different.
Yeah.
All right, this was a wild conversation that I didn't think would go in the directions that it did. Hopefully, people can take this for what it was, which was rampant speculation into taking Simon Baron Cohen's theories a little bit too seriously and putting on my tinfoil hat and being like, okay, but maybe he kind of has a point. Maybe there is a there that we just haven't considered because we are not at the tier of galaxy brain that you need to be in order to fully comprehend what the good doctor was actually getting at. Now, would he agree with us? No, absolutely not. He would not agree with anything we've said here. But,
We have fun.
Death of the author and whatever, we're redoing this extreme of the male brain theory, but only for specific clusters of autists. Yes. All right. That's a good place to end this. If you would like to find me, you can find me christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. Please do not email me about how I'm wrong about the theory of the extreme male brain of autism. I am very aware. I am so aware. You can join our Discord. We have a Discord. If you'd like to join it, you can. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can donate to the Against Malaria Foundation. That'll link in the bio. You can find me on Twitter at ChristianityOn. You can find me on Blue Sky at Blue Sky or at ChristianityOn.bluesky.social. You can find me on Substack at Christianity on the Spectrum and Dispatches from the Autism War. Eurydice, go.
I can be found on Substack at Eurydice Lives, and I am usually on Twitter, although locked right now, under also Eurydice Lives.
Great. All right. See ya.